I really thought of him as a little bit Christ-like, you know, with what we know about Christ. And he really cared about things and about mankind and about everything. I tried to make him the goodest character I could, and also the most misunderstood.
Initially, the surfer went about his business dispassionately, as he had done everywhere else. But he comes into contact with the Fantastic Four, and he comes into contact with Alicia Masters and is exposed to their humanity. And that exposure changes him somewhat. That exposure makes him see the worth of humanity and eventually leads to him rebelling against his master, Galactus.
Basically, they were his bridge to people of Earth. They were the first folks that he was actually in contact with, and sort of set his tone of how he was going to deal with Earth people after that. He met the best and then started working his way down the ladder from there. As I recall, they did a little story bit with the Thing and the Silver Surfer having a squabble over Alice Master, this blind sculptor that the Thing had a thing for. I think that was really kind of minor in the book, and then they went on from there. But it was nice, fun 1960s comics. But they didn't know quite what to do with him afterwards, because he was this cosmic character that they sort of had set down on Earth and wouldn't let him do anything. And he was like that for close to a decade afterwards.
I think when the Surfer came back into FF, really less than a year later from his initial appearance, and they got involved with Doom trying to steal his powers, you know, that really brought into focus what the Surfer could be and played him against the classic FF villain in Dr. Doom.
This was one of the high points of Jack and Stan's career on the Fantastic Four. They did over 100 issues of this book, so it's hard to pick any one that was the best, but this was one of the best, this particular story arc.
At some point, I liked the Silver Surfer so much, I wanted to give him his own series. Well, Jack was too busy. Jack would have been the ideal guy. But luckily, John Buscema was available. John Buscema, to me, is the closest thing the comic field ever had to Michelangelo.
His layouts were very, very simple, almost sketchy, and yet every single line, you didn't need to see the rest of it because you looked at the line and you could see the rest of the drawing. I mean, he was a brilliant draftsman.
He said, sure, he'd love to do the Silver Surfer. The series had a nice consistency as far as the artwork went, and I wrote them all. They were the best I could do, and I loved that series.
Jack's was blocky. He was a very cubistic artist. They say Jack never erased anything. First time he went down, that was it. John Buscema, on the other hand, created this very graceful and regal, noble-looking creature that was floating around on a surfboard in space or in the sky, and you just were incredibly impressed by the visual of it alone.
With John Buscema, he played with the origin, and he really took what he loves to call the Christ on a surfboard aspect of it and brought it to the forefront. Well, a lot of people out there are going to get the Christ on the surfboard thing and roll their eyes and want to walk away. But me, I'm like, yeah, Christ on a surfboard. You know, I love the philosophical aspects of the character. I love the sort of Lord Byron poses and the long speeches. You know, reminds me of Rod Serling. He'd always have these characters giving these wonderful, long, outraged speeches about humanity. You know. No one had done anything quite like what Stan did with the Surfer then.
Up until that point, John Buscema had been doing little jobs here and there at Marvel and really hadn't gotten something he could sink his teeth into, and they gave him the Silver Surfer. It was just incredible. He was able to do all the things that he was like hinting at in these other books, like he'd been doing some Avengers or something like that. But then he did this Silver Surfer book. It was just this incredibly beautiful book. It was the best looking book Marvel was putting out at that time. You know, Stan ran off on his little stories, but it was basically John who just showed everybody how you should draw the Silver Surfer.
The Surfer that Stan and John Buscema did, I think, to me anyway, had a real different tone and texture to what Stan and Jack did in FF. And I think one of the reasons is because the Surfer was suddenly, you know, he was a main character. He was the star of the show, not just a supporting player. And I think that really allowed Stan in particular to get into him as a character and really dig into his head. He was a mirror for us, and especially for the time. You know, you're talking about the late 60s and early 70s, obviously a great deal of upheaval in the culture. And John Buscema brought a real grace and fluidity to the Surfer that I don't think Jack Kirby captured as well, because Jack's stuff was really about power, you know, superheroes that really jumped off the page at you, whereas John's stuff was maybe finer in some ways and really fit the tone of the stories that Stan was doing at the time.
They're not the same character. One was a cold alien learning about humanity, and the other was a human, essentially. He was from the planet Zen-La, but he was a passionate human. So it really was different.
John Buscema's Surfer was a lot more fluid and a lot more graceful than Jack's Surfer. I love both of them, and I think they're both appropriate depictions of the Surfer, but I think because of the lengthy run that John had on the book when it was a solo title, I think that's the Surfer that a lot of people really see in their minds. Jack did the Surfer as a guest star in FF more often than not, and he really looked a lot more alien when Jack drew him. I think when John got a hold of him, he made him a little bit more like us.
Stan did have a nice one last run on it with an artist, a French artist named Mobius, which is also, you know, one of the high points of the visual history of this character.
Oh, Mobius! Somehow at a meeting I said to him, how would you like to do the Silver Surfer? And he amazed me, surprised me. He said, yeah, I'd love to. Well, he doesn't get that emotional. He probably said, yes, I would like to. But that was good enough for me. I really think, much as I love the Surfer, I think the story that I did with Mobius was my favorite Surfer story, because that one, to me, really had a message. I was amazed. I loved that story, and the way Mobius drew it, of course, was different than any Marvel artist could have done it. He had his own style, a magnificent style, and oh yeah, that, of all the stories I've written, that's got to go right up at the top of my all-time favorites.
Later on, they put him in a book called The Defenders, which didn't sell all that well, even though it had the Hulk and Submariner and other characters in it. It wasn't until, like I said, about a decade later, when they decided they were going to let him off the earth and let different people other than Stan write it, that it actually started selling very well.
I didn't want anybody to write the Surfer but me. And for a long time, I was the only guy who put the words in Norrin Radd's mouth. But I couldn't hold on to them forever and, you know, had to let other people write them. I'm sure they did a wonderful job. I couldn't get myself to read the stories. I could not get myself to read Silver Surfer stories that other people wrote, because I wouldn't care if Shakespeare had written them. I'd have been disappointed.